In the year 2008, amidst the financial heart of Chicago, one of the most brutal mergers in the history of real estate unfolded. Tens of millions of dollars were wagered on one side, while the livelihoods of thousands of employees hung in the balance on the other. The fate of an entire massive business empire was decided in a single night. The victor in that bloodless battle created a dominant ecosystem and reshaped the entire industry for decades to come. Her name was Eleanor Vance, and here is what almost no business book or economic magazine will tell you about her. She was not the smartest person in the boardroom, not the most aggressive negotiator, nor the most charismatic boss or the most feared adversary. While other executives were slowly exhausting themselves, writhing in the burnout of middle age with bloodshot eyes and sleepless nights trying to control every minor variable of the deal, this woman carried an eerily tranquil presence. We live in an era where busyness is celebrated like a medal of honor, where a generation relentlessly charges forward, straining to mold the world to their personal will only to collapse in their own depleted pride. We mistakenly believe that the winner must be the one who swings the sharpest sword, shouts the loudest, and slams the table with the most force. But if we take a step back to observe the workings of the mind, we will realize a forgotten truth: true power rarely takes a loud form. Like a calm lake hiding swift currents beneath its depths, absolute strength does not lie in exhausting oneself to fight the storm, but in the ability to become the silent eye of the storm itself. Eleanor Vance did not win because she delivered a stronger blow, but because she refused to participate in the energy-depleting game that those around her were blindly rushing into, revealing a profound truth for souls fractured by fatigue. Sometimes, the most courageous act we can perform is simply to stop struggling. To understand the root of that extraordinary stillness, we must turn back the pages of memory to the 80s of the last century. At that time, Eleanor was only a girl in her early 20s, an obscure employee tossed into the invisible corners of a fiercely competitive urban development firm on Wall Street. In a place where the growl of ambition and male power drowned out everything else, she was completely marginalized, trapped in trivial administrative tasks and besieged by a feeling of utter helplessness as her destiny depended entirely on the big bosses reveling at the peak. We, in such moments of despair and disadvantage, often let our egos blindly take control. The natural reflex of a bruised and cornered ego is the longing to flail, to strain under a facade of false bravery, or to rush into meaningless battles just to soothe fear and prove one's existence too early to those who did not even bother to look down. Familiar self-improvement advice always urges us to shatter every barrier immediately, to scream to claim our place under the sun. But that is actually a cruel psychological trap, a tempting illusion that causes us to burn away what little energy remains instead of nurturing it. The frantic impatience to escape a weak position robs us of the most subtle and precious lesson that adversity is silently laying before us. Instead of letting herself sink into the bitterness of an outsider, Eleanor chose a path few would expect: a spectacular transformation of consciousness. In the very mud of invisibility, she did not struggle but transformed her disadvantaged position into an absolute silent observatory. Men drunk on power at the peak are often blinded by the very crowns they wear, but from the depths, Eleanor gained a piercing vision. She quietly recorded every psychological blind spot, every manifestation of fragile arrogance, and the fatal flaws in how those people exercise their power. Power always comes with ostentation, and that very ostentation exposes every vital weakness that the strong can never see for themselves. For us, this opens a liberating perspective for panicked minds. Think about it: what if the pain, the deadlock, or even the state of exhaustion you are enduring in this moment is not a punishment of fate at all? Like Eleanor, we can stop resisting our current weakness, stop blaming the darkness, and start using it as an invaluable observatory to see through the truths that the dazzling light of empty success has obscured, gathering for ourselves the silent wisdom from the very corners rejected by the world. As the wheels of time rolled into the 90s, Eleanor's silent observatory witnessed a new drama of human haste. That was when Richard Sterling appeared on the market like a whirlwind, becoming the perfect embodiment of the toxic work culture slowly devouring the world. Richard represented a frantic desire for expansion, ready to burn through every stage just to reach for the illusion of greatness and power. We are often easily mesmerized by such people, those who wrap themselves in a suffocatingly fast rhythm and consider immediate reaction to every incident as proof of superior ability. But under the insightful gaze of those on the sidelines, that non-stop busyness is merely a thin veneer hiding deep-seated insecurity. Constantly flaunting strength and rushing into every race does not make one stronger. On the contrary, it creates a terrible and cruel drain of energy for those who live by nurturing that outward illusion. Like a fire that flares up too violently and then exhausts its own oxygen, minds that always try to control every movement of the world around them will ultimately reap only exhaustion. We rush forward unconsciously, believing that constantly doing something will bring us a sense of security, without realizing that this habit of reacting and constant straining is exactly what is eroding us from deep within our souls. While Richard Sterling's ambition-driven meat grinder was roaring and crushing every obstacle in its path, Eleanor made a profoundly quiet decision to step back and choose to stand completely outside that furious vortex. While the business world celebrated constant intervention, she silently applied an ancient Eastern philosophical concept right in the heart of the brutal marketplace, the concept of wu-wei. We often harbor a deep misconception that not reacting to a challenge is a sign of cowardice or weakness, but through Eleanor's meditative lens, that stillness is the ultimate art of energy preservation. Instead of rushing to draw her sword to respond to loud and provocative attacks, she devoted all her time and mind to quietly building a solid internal machine, patiently laying every foundation stone. She understood a simple but cruel law of nature, that the most intense storms are also the ones that fade the fastest because they have consumed their own strength. By refusing to join the race of burning through stages, Eleanor simply let her opponents exhaust their last drops of strength in the illusion of outward glory. The lesson of soul first aid here for us is clear when facing forces striving to prove dominance and wanting to drain your vitality. Sometimes the strongest act of resistance is absolute stillness, doing nothing to let the enemy's fire burn itself out into ashes. That Eleanor's stillness was not a state of apathy, but an intellectual resistance against the fear of missing out that gnaws at the modern human heart day and night. Witnessing competitors constantly acquiring and shining brightly, most of us easily fall into the trap of midlife anxiety, a secret panic seeing others seemingly moving ahead and leaving us behind in the hurried race of life. Our minds begin to scream, urging us to chase frantically, hungering for recognition while forgetting a simple natural truth: a tree that tries to reach for the sky too hastily when its roots are shallow is more easily toppled by the first storms. Understanding the fragile truth of those superficial values, Eleanor's strategy was an epic of patience, where she poured her heart into silently building a solid root system deep beneath the dark earth. Instead of worrying about reaching out with proud high branches to catch the storm in exchange for some fleeting fame that could easily break at any moment, she focused entirely on the internal sustainability of the organization. She realized that true strength never lies in the lush canopy reaching out for the world to admire, but in the silent underground currents that no one sees, where strength is distilled and preserved through the harshest years. Inner peace finally opens when we learn to stop measuring our own value by the flowering speed of others, to calmly root ourselves deep into our own core, because once the roots are firmly attached to Mother Earth, rising up is just a natural breath without any painful exertion. That silent underground current continued to nourish Eleanor's empire into the early 2000s, a time marking a pivotal hidden confrontation with the aging former chairman. At this point, the once powerful leader was facing the sunset of his career, submerged in utter terror at the prospect of permanently losing control over the legacy he had spent his life building. We are often easily blinded by outward power, by stern commands or coercive contracts swirling around us, not realizing that when a person is losing their position, they tend to brandish the mask of authority most violently to hide the insecurity gnawing at their soul. But 4. Eleanor, the psychological observatory tempered from years of disadvantage, gave her a sharp habit of understanding and reading people without relying on empty promises or loud, boastful threats. Instead of panicking or bothering to react to that thorny outer shell, she calmly looked through every defensive barrier to touch the very core of the most primal fear rooted deep within her opponent. She understood that the old chairman did not actually demand the absolute loyalty he preached. Rather, those oppressive moves were merely the silent scream of an ego struggling to cling to a fading bit of power before the abyss of oblivion. Our liberating lesson is this: when facing the rage or unreasonable impositions of others, instead of letting your mind be disturbed and rushing to defend, try once to silently observe the fragile gap between what they intentionally display and what they truly fear. When you realize that the attacks aimed at you are often just projections of the attacker's own core pain and weakness, you will naturally shed the burden of anger, smiling calmly as you walk past the ego's manipulative games without dropping the peaceful stillness in your soul. It was precisely through her ability to see through the old chairman's ultimate fear that Eleanor performed the supreme art of stillness, completely detaching her ego from the power game. When pressured to sign strictly binding documents intended to strip away freedom and force loyalty, our common reaction is an explosion of resentment because the ego is deeply insulted. We often yearn to stand up and argue, wanting to slam the table in refusal to protect our honor and assert our independent status against manipulation. Yet, she chose a completely different path, not letting her ego be provoked by even a small ripple. Before the threatening, scrutinizing gaze of her opponent, she gently picked up the pen and signed those surface agreements with an eerily calm demeanor, using that feigned humility to buy back an invisible but incredibly precious asset: time. She understood a silent philosophical truth that the piece of paper itself or those forced oaths possessed no real power other than calming a soul paranoid about power. Grand architectures of fame and control, if built on a foundation of coercion and fear, inherently carry the seeds of their own destruction and will surely crack from deep within, without anyone needing to swing a hammer. This is a wonderful antidote for our minds whenever we are caught in the imposing vortexes of life. Understanding that the opponent's strength is just a sandcastle built on insecurity, we do not need to strain to resist those illusions. We only need to smile and step back, playing their surface game to keep our minds absolutely free and peacefully waiting for the moment that wall of fear collapses under its own weight. The silent psychological surgery Eleanor performed was not just a brilliant business strategy but also brought us a practical psychological first aid lesson in a world full of wounds. Stop reacting to what others intentionally perform and start silently observing what they are striving to hide. When someone rushes at you with bitter words, threats, or unreasonable demands, our minds are often immediately pulled into the storm of defense. We hurriedly don the armor of anger, wasting immense precious vitality just to fight back against the ghost created by their own ego. But if we know how to step back for just one breath, keeping our minds like a flat lake to see through that prickly, arrogant mask, we will see that behind that tyrannical aggression is usually just a soul cowering in the ultimate fear of worthlessness or loss of control. The moment you perceive the fragile gap between loud performance and silent pain in the person opposite you, a great inner liberation will bloom as you realize you are no longer bound by the expectations and judgments of the outside world for another second. You do not need to manipulate or exploit their weakness at all, but simply refuse to be turned into a puppet in the tearful psychological play they are directing. This thorough understanding is like an invisible but compassionate surgical blade, gently severing every cruel thread binding your emotions to the toxic behaviors of others. When we shed the burden of having to constantly prove ourselves against delusional expectations or shallow judgments, we finally find the wide path back to true peaceful stillness, where the soul is free to breathe in the vast space of mindfulness. Intact and untakeable by anyone, that the peaceful freedom nurtured by rejecting the masks of the ego is not only a shield protecting the mind from manipulation but also the ultimate source of power to face the most devastating earthquakes, as was vividly proven when we return to the context of the year 2008. As the financial storm swept through like a hurricane, tearing apart every illusion of market prosperity, Eleanor's symbolic backbone project suddenly faced the risk of total collapse. When a cherished work is pushed to the brink of doom, the ego's survival instinct often screams, urging us to hide the wound at any cost. We tend to behave like most leaders in that humiliating situation, which is to hurriedly use public relations tricks to cover up the truth or fall into a state of defensive panic to salvage some thin honor before the world's scrutinizing eyes. People always exhaust their vitality to patch up a perfect image even when the foundation is crumbling, trembling before judgment. Without realizing that very effort to cover up is the darkest prison incarcerating the soul. However, the woman with a meditative mindset completely refused the path of fear. Instead, she made a decision so contrary it shocked everyone witnessing it. She straightforwardly opened all the books, transparently exposing every fatal flaw of the project to the public. That act of calmly removing all defensive armor in the moment of greatest weakness did not bear the mark of a desperate surrender, but was a deep stillness perceiving the nature of impermanence, proving that when we courageously step into the light with all our own fractures, the storm outside suddenly loses all power to threaten. The decision to open the doors of her own dilapidated warehouse instead of trying to cover it with glittering, empty tarps led us to a profound philosophical realization exploring the power of vulnerability. We are often fed a haunting belief that hiding flaws is the only way to survive in a world full of judging eyes, that any crack will be an invitation for the hungry wolves to rush in and tear the soul apart. Yet, in the art of mental stillness, when you self-expose your weaknesses most calmly, you have actually completely stripped away the opponent's weapon and smugness. Try to be still and imagine those sharpening their claws, waiting for the moment you stumble to gleefully attack the perfect facade you are desperately maintaining, only to suddenly stop in utter confusion because there is no longer a target to aim at. They cannot use shame to intimidate a person who has calmly embraced their own holes, and the insane confidence radiating from that act of absolute transparency created an overwhelming energy field that made the enemy retreat. It collapsed the entire common logic of egos always hungering for a downfall, for how can the world corner a person who has voluntarily stepped down from the pedestal of pride to stand firmly on the very rugged ground of primal truth? The most solid defense turned out to never lie in the frantic building of high, cold fortress walls, but brilliantly manifests in the very moment we stop running, gently removing the threatening sword of external circumstances with a calm smile, embracing the imperfection of human existence. Standing firmly on the rugged ground of truth after voluntarily shedding all defensive armor. Open day. Brilliant gateway of insight, leading to a spectacular change in perspective regarding the losses people often taste in the second half of life. As the busy years gradually pass and the illusion of perfection begins to crack, our minds often tend to gnaw on the extreme pain of broken achievements, desperately clinging to the shadow of a lost golden age. But through Eleanor's deep stillness in the eye of the crisis storm, we awaken to a soul-soothing truth that failure is absolutely not a cold finish line of fate, but actually just an inevitable change in the terrain of the human flow. Instead of wasting the last remnants of vitality to frantically rebuild collapsed fortress walls to restore an irrevocable past, true liberation lies in our courage to walk into those ruins with clear eyes, unburdened by prejudice. It is in that silent desolation that we are invited to seek the invaluable advantages hidden in a pile of rubble, the seeds of life and the broad perspectives that an intact, high-walled castle could never provide. When the magnificent ceiling collapses, that is also when we first see an entire vast starry sky above, teaching us how to embrace the new terrain of life with a wide, calm heart full of compassion for our own limits. That silent insight not only helped save a project from the ashes but also became the sharpest weapon when we returned to the night before the fateful merger mentioned earlier. In the thick atmosphere of the boardroom, every faction fell into a state of extreme panic, while the noise of a market constantly urging and pressing forced weak egos to make split-second decisions. The human mind, when locked in the glass cage of fear, often loses the concept of natural rhythm, frantically running after the time arrangement of others and turning itself into puppets pulled by the strings of haste. Yet, in the center of that furious vortex, Eleanor calmly controlled the speed of the negotiation with an oddly leisurely manner. Instead of rushing into the dizzying gears to respond, she actively slowed the pace to the maximum at the very moment her opponents most hungered to strike fast and win fast, thereby gently manipulating the entire flow of time according to her own silent will. This art of pacing the battle suggests a deep liberation from the sickness of the age that we are absolutely not required to dance to the frantic music played by the outside world. When others use speed to flaunt strength and cover up internal insecurity, your act of calmly taking a deep breath and expanding the present moment is the act of reclaiming ultimate mastery, turning the flow of time from a pressing tyrant into a gentle river flowing obediently at your feet. That leisurely manipulation of time's flow leads us to a deep analysis of the rhythm of human existence, where speed and haste often display strength but are actually just a perfect veneer of fear. In the spinning modern world, when facing a crisis or an aggressive opponent, our unconscious minds are always urged to react immediately with equal or even greater intensity. We deceive ourselves that rushing to strain and respond will help us regain control, but that remains forever a desperate illusion of the trembling ego. Like Eleanor calmly stepping back in the middle of a flaming boardroom, the soothing lesson for us is that the one who masters their own breath in panic will automatically master the whole room. You absolutely do not need to raise your voice louder than the one shouting or run faster than the one rushing frantically. The true art of living and the ultimate liberation lie in refusing to be swept away by the fury of others. When someone brings their storm of chaos before you, you carry the absolute silent privilege not to invite that storm across the threshold of your soul. By relaxing your shoulders and keeping your heartbeat leisurely amidst the circle of pressure, you not only hang a curtain protecting your inner self from exhaustion but also quietly force the noisy world outside to automatically slow down to follow your majestic stillness. That majestic stillness presiding over the entire negotiation space naturally paved the way for the decisive turning point of the entire historic merger. When the opponents were completely exhausted from constantly clinging to their hurried rhythm and oversized masks of power, they began to expose the staggering gaps of extreme confusion. That is when we touch a profoundly relieving truth for our weary minds, realizing that ultimate power actually never required painful straining or the display of violence. Eleanor's greatest victory finally came not from swinging a hand to deliver the most expensive attack or mobilizing every massive financial resource to crush the opponent's will. On the contrary, the meditative art of stillness lay in her calmly dropping a tiny pebble, offering a condition that seemed casual but fell accurately at the most fragile moment when the opponent was most severely losing balance. That effortless strike was like a drop of water gently shattering the fake silent surface of a glass already filled with fear, collapsing the entire solid defense without wavering even a bit of the vitality of the one who sowed it. We often torture ourselves with the toxic belief that only effort to the point of exhaustion, only thunderous blows costing much heart and effort, will bring worthy results in life. But this universe always operates in a much more compassionate way, favoring insightful souls who know how to patiently wait for the natural breaking point of all things, so that with just a mindful, gentle touch, all the largest barriers will automatically collapse at the feet of those who know how to smile and follow the flow instead of furiously fighting against it. Immediately after the moment that tiny pebble touched the lake and decided the outcome of the great merger, the business world thought it would witness the most brilliant coronation in the post-merger era. However, Eleanor brought a move that utterly shocked all those hungering for glory. Right at the peak of dazzling glory, when the crown of absolute power had been handed over, she calmly stepped back and yielded the prestigious executive chair. We often live an entire life in a frantic race just to crave the moment of reigning at the peak, certain that upon reaching it, we will find our own eternal value. The crowd's amazement at that woman's silent withdrawal exposed a cruel psychological trap most of humanity blindly falls into, the act of tightly attaching identity and one's entire self-worth to a title or a specific achievement. Our ego always whispers lies that we are the chair we sit in, the medals we own, making us writhe to cling to that thin vanity for fear that if we let them go, we will turn into nothingness. But glory is actually just a temporary stop in the flow of life, not a magnificent prison to lock our souls in and exhaust our vitality for the rest of our lives just to desperately protect the throne. Calmly letting go of power right at the most brilliant moment is not an abandonment, but a dazzling awakening, completely stripping away the ego's power to manipulate. When you are no longer bound by the obsession of defining yourself through external labels granted by society, you will experience an ultimate liberation, gently shedding the 1,000-pound burden of expectation to leisurely walk through life, seeing clearly that your silent inner being has always been complete and greater than any flashy title the world can drape upon you. That act of letting go of the brilliant throne was not an end, but the beginning of the greatest work of a lifetime, bringing us to a deeper dimension where the peak of a career is building an ecosystem capable of operating smoothly in one's absence. When Eleanor stepped down from the chair of power, she did not leave behind a desolate void or a mess requiring her eternal presence to save. Our ego, with its cruel hidden pride, often longs to see everything collapse when we leave, just to satisfy the soothing illusion that we are an irreplaceable link, that this world will stop turning without us. We often feel secretly smug when a project is in disorder or those around us are wavering when we are absent, deceiving ourselves that it is the true measure of greatness and personal importance. But through the meditative lens of a silent wisdom, that clinging is not how we create a legacy, rather, we are merely molding a prison for ourselves and others. That profound woman touched the true peace of late life when she fully understood that she was leaving a living legacy, not a burden requiring others to constantly prop up. She devoted her final heart and effort not to hoarding fleeting glory, but to patiently uprooting every toxic root, planting seeds, and nurturing a fertile land for the next generations. That is an act of silent and immensely tolerant dedication, as we awaken to realize that the most sacred value of human existence lies not in how much power we manipulate in a finite moment, but in the fact that the seeds we labor to sow can still grow into sturdy oaks, continuing to spread lush branches to shelter all species long after we have leisurely merged back into the vast forest. A great sense of liberation surges when we gently step back, quietly watching our work freely breathe its original rhythm, smiling calmly to accept the truth that we have gifted life a cool, self-flowing stream, instead of turning ourselves into a miserable gatekeeper carrying on our shoulders the magnificent but deadly tomb of our own narrow ego. The miraculous transformation Eleanor Vance underwent was not just a swap of positions in the marketplace, but actually a deep healing process for a mind once besieged by countless illusions of the ego. When we look deeply together at the condition of overthinking, that terminal disease silently suffocating modern human life, we will see it as nothing more than the mind's desperate effort to forcibly control a reality that is inherently fluid and uncertain. Eleanor found the answer to that maze not by trying to think smarter or more complexly, but by learning the art of stillness to let those calculations dissipate into nothingness. A gentle truth opens before us: you absolutely do not need to become more valiant or more decisive to face the waves. What you truly need is just a more tolerant patience for your own rhythm and everything around you. True liberation begins from the moment we give our past versions a most gentle forgiveness, the version once trapped in the excessive vortex of those impatient and foolish younger years. We embrace old mistakes like sacred scars of maturity, understanding that every stumble and past franticness were necessary steps leading us back to the profound stillness of the present, where every noise of urgency vanishes to make room for a real sense of peace. That gentle forgiveness finally leads us to the real answer for the era of exhaustion that Eleanor Vance so authoritatively demonstrated. She won the long-term game of life because she resolutely refused to play by the narrow and lethal rules of those who only know how to pursue short-term gains and outward flashiness. The most human lesson and deep life value we can distill from this journey is patience and precision in consciousness, an ability to dare to think on a scale and a time horizon that makes all surrounding haste meaningless. Never forget the ancient teaching that Eleanor applied thoroughly after winning the victory. The most important thing is to continue tightening your helmet strap to preserve mindfulness and prepare for what is sustainable ahead. Shed the burden of illusory perfection that has been weighing on your shoulders for so long, take a deep breath to feel life present, and quietly watch the river of life find its own way to the great sea without the violent intervention of the ego. We invite you to click subscribe, like, and share this video to help us spread healing messages and continue listening to more fascinating videos every day on the journey to find serenity. How do you feel about Eleanor Vance's story and her philosophy of silent living when relating it to the pressures and haste in your own real life? We look forward to hearing your shares, experiences, and feelings from deep within your heart in the comments section below so we can learn and grow together. We wish everyone watching this video abundant health, a life full of joy, and that every passing day is truly peaceful in the soul. Goodbye and see you in the next videos.